joining me today.
Chance, it's awesome to be here, man. I love what you're doing with your brand, Chance the Dev. So I'm pumped to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm really good at ripping other people off. It's like one of my fortes. So, sweet. You run a business. You started your own business, what, 2 years ago, something like that?
Yeah, about 1.5 years ago, yeah.
I asked you before the show, you definitely would describe yourself as a startup, correct?
Startup, for sure.
Awesome. Let's talk a little bit about your background first, and we'll go through like a brief origin story.
Yeah.
I mean, what made you want to start your own business based on where you came from and what you were good at and what you found out that you wanted to do with your life, and yeah, what led to that decision?
Yeah, sounds great. Yeah, definitely data-driven design. I describe it as a small, scrappy startup. So we try to do the work that any larger agency would be able to do with just not as much overhead cost, which is kind of the definition of maybe like a lean startup. So my origin story, I guess comic book type origin story, I was born in Rochester, Michigan. I was always into sports and rap music. Probably not a lot of people follow my content just yet, but I try to relate everything to sports and rap music in some way. The business world and in the digital marketing and web development world, I find that there's actually a lot of parallels to sports and rap music. And getting into my own business, while I was working for the Detroit Pistons, I started as an intern there for 2 years unpaid, and it was a great gig. It was during fax machine era. So it was not before web, but it was before web was the primary communication. We were communicating with the media primarily. I was there for about 7 years, and that was the time when the website, Pistons.com and DetroitShock.com, the WNBA team, started to become the primary communication method. And around that time, my communications role got into web and got into social media a little bit as, professional organizations didn't have MySpace pages or Facebook pages yet, but eyes were starting to shift towards digital media more, and Google AdWords had come out, and so it was very, very early. But the thing that really got me into starting my own business and getting into web development and digital marketing was I found that there was this gap in fantasy football, funny enough. It was quite popular. This was back in probably 2006 or 2007. It started to become very popular, and there wasn't a lot of content in this particular niche around dynasty fantasy football. And so I created my first website just in HTML using Yahoo web hosting, where you would upload HTML files into the Yahoo web hosting.
Been there, done that.
Awesome. I had no aspirations of becoming a web developer at that point in time. I was all about the content. And so that was the beginning of the origin story around starting web-based businesses, was just having something to say about a particular gap in the world, happened to be fantasy football. And I wanted to say a lot about how to win a dynasty league. My methodology of doing it was to start my own website, learn HTML, and then several years later, that became WordPress. So I turned that into a WordPress site. I've always been heavy in the content management side of things. So that's kind of where I think a lot of web developers and probably other guests on the show, my guess is that their origin story is more from a development or a programming standpoint, and mine's definitely more from a blogging and content management standpoint, and then has manifested itself into, okay, now I can create a client service business around doing that for other businesses, creating websites for other businesses. So that's where we are today. But it all started from my love for fantasy football and not really having content out there accessible to me and saying, hey, let's just create a website and see where it goes from there. So it was kind of fun.
Sure, yeah, and when I started this podcast, I would say that my perception was very similar in that I thought I was going to be talking to a lot of people who maybe got a degree in computer science and that was how they got their start, or when they were 12 years old, they hacked into their grandmother's computer and made it do something ridiculous. But it's actually interesting how many people, I think I've only talked to one person in this entire run who's had a background in anything related to computer science, and everyone else is either self-taught or had come from another business or is seeking a second or a third or fourth career, myself included. So it is really fascinating to see all the different angles that people come at web development from. For you, running a startup now, talk a little bit about what differences you see between running your own business, running your own startup, working for a startup, and that life that you had when you were working for a larger organization like the Pistons.
Yeah, so working for a larger organization like the Pistons, you were at the mercy of the calendar for that organization. And the calendar for that particular organization happened to be extremely intense. There was really no off season in that we had a men's team and a women's team. And the men's team was very good for the 7 years that I was there. So they would play from October through June. And then the women's team would play from basically April through October. So it was really like this, we called it year-round hoops. I was at the arena for probably between 60 and 80 hours a week. The job required me to either be in the arena or traveling with the team. That experience was very different because of the schedule of the organization. Being in the entertainment business, other people, like the 99% of the rest of the world, that was their time to relax, that was their leisure time. And so we were always working. So it was, after 7 years of doing that, the major lifestyle shift was, okay, now I don't necessarily have to work every holiday or every weekend. That's the time, if you think of people who are in the entertainment industry, like your leisure time as a fan is their work time. So that was one main difference. I would say the other main difference would span any type of organization versus what I have now, is that definitely being part of a team, a larger team, it takes a little bit longer to get things done and there's more meetings. And so in data-driven design right now, we're very lean on our time and our meetings, and our process is very different than in a larger organization. So with the Pistons, I also worked for Columbia State Community College for 4 years. Those two organizations, in order to get anything done, you have to go through multiple departments in an organization. So now at data-driven design, we basically have 6 people. So the 6 people that we have, we're making decisions very quickly. They're based on what our clients need, and there's no departments that make decisions. It's basically like, okay, what do we need to do today? Let's get it done, which is very different from working at either a larger agency or a brand,
Sure.
Like on the client side, as we would say.
Yeah, and I know that you have aspirations to grow data-driven designs, and obviously you don't want to be a startup forever, or maybe you do. Some people do. That's totally fine too. There's no judgment in there. It's just like the nature of business is if you don't grow, you die at some point, right? And so there is this struggle for business owners, I think, that on one hand it's like, oh, I started this so that I didn't have to sit in meetings all day, or because I didn't like following other people's processes, or because I just want to be able to make rapid fire decisions. As you scale and as you grow, you sort of find yourself in a situation where maybe I need a process to handle this because we have too many decision points, whatever the case may be. Or you run into pain points where you have one person saying something over here and another person saying over here, and you need to unify that message. I know for you, we've talked about this a lot. It's something that I'm really fascinated in because you don't like processes. You don't like meetings. I don't like meetings. Who likes meetings? Nobody likes meetings. And I don't think anyone really loves processes per se, but what we love about processes are the pain points that they resolve when you are working on a larger team. So can you talk a little bit about, this is sort of a sidebar, but can you talk a little bit about, like, when you think about scaling, when you think about growing, you think about adding new team members, do you have some thoughts on how you might deal with some of those same pain points without falling into that trap of too many processes that keep us too tight into this one system of doing things that you hate so much?
Yeah, absolutely. And so a couple of things I want to say along those lines before I answer that question. I think the number one thing I've learned in the last year and a half of running this business is that I started it because there were some things that I felt like I could make myself happier doing than in previous roles. And about 6 to 8 months in, I had to start checking myself on, am I falling back into the same trap? And am I defeating the purpose of having my own company by continuing to do some of the things that I knew didn't make me personally fulfilled at the end of the day? whether or not they were the right business decision almost became irrelevant. I just had to check myself at the end of 2017 really and say, am I happy with how I'm running my own company? Are my days feeling longer and more tedious than they need to be, or are they feeling sort of productive and fast and breezy? And so the things for me personally that sort of annoy me or bring me down really, like as a person, are what I feel like are wastes of time, inefficiencies and things like that. And so I think that to a certain extent meetings and to a certain extent over communicating or not making a decision fast enough, it annoys me personally. It doesn't mean that it's the wrong thing to do, but I think like the number one thing that I learned again was to just say, what are the things that are making you unhappy or making your life harder? And a couple of the things had to do with having too many people on my team. I found that I was communicating the same thing to too many different people. The message wasn't necessarily, I wasn't good at communicating with more than a certain amount of people. And so I needed to make some decisions around how do I pick the right people for my team and the right amount of people for my team so that we can have a process and scale a little bit, but at a rate that actually makes me as a person happy at the end of the day and doesn't make me feel stressed. And so there's certain people that I think would maybe want to put 30, 40, 50 people around them and delegate, and I'm more of the I'm definitely more of like the do it myself type of person. And so I had to, because doing things myself makes me happier, I prefer to have like a smaller team. That's number one. And then I think to your point about process and meetings, I do believe that that's an area where I need to improve and continue to pick the right people and learn how to delegate and communicate better. That's definitely a weakness for me. I thought it was a strength, but I've realized that it's a weakness because it doesn't make me happy. It makes me feel nervous and stressed out. Like if you were on my team, for example, knowing how talented and reliable you are, I would still feel like this overwhelming need to like check up and see if, like, I guess I'm a micromanager.
Yeah, that's what was coming to mind.
It's like this, but I never thought I was, right? So it's like learning that about myself, having that self-awareness now, to having the ability to know that that's who you are. Now I feel like I can be in a decision to potentially scale the company moving forward. And you're correct. I do want that, but I want to make sure that it's either making my life happier or easier, or that I'm ready to do it. One of the reasons why I started my own company was because I wanted to actually do less of the project management and less of the oversight of other people, and I wanted to learn how to do it myself and then activate it myself and get that instant gratification of building something. So it's this fine line, you know what I mean?
And a couple things you've done that were really interesting to me. You start your business because you want to do all of these things yourself, right? And then you grow your business, and in order to sustain that, you have to hire people to do some of those things, and then you start managing people, and that's like a whole different skill set than you got in it to do, like you didn't get in this to necessarily manage 5-10 people, but when you grow, you sort of transition from that working in your business to working on your business, and that involves all these other skills that you have to pick up along the way. And I think it's totally natural to, when you're that kind of, because I'm this kind of person too, like anytime that I have to depend on other people to do anything, because I know I'm really particular about a lot of different things, it's like this nitpickiness that I know that I have to really watch myself when I'm dealing with other people and managing other people, because it's a really hard instinct to overcome when you're doing it all yourself. I totally get that, but it's really key to know that about yourself and to sort of try to look for those adjustments and those improvements along the way. I think that's totally great. And then the last thing I'll say is, people talk a lot about work-life balance, and I know you're a really hard worker and you're all about the process, you're all about getting the grind. And for you, what I get out of this conversation is that balance for you is not necessarily working less, it's doing the things at work that you set out to do and doing them in your way. That's why you start a business. You don't start a business so that you can listen to someone else tell you how to run your business. You start it so you can run your business exactly how you want to, and I think that's a really good insight there too.
Yeah, thanks, man. I think like that for me has been something that I'm proud of, where I don't disagree or have any kind of, I don't have anything but respect for people that have built a business around doing less of the work themselves and doing more of the management. I think that that's the typical model. And yeah, to your point, like I've figured out about myself that that's not necessarily what always makes me the happiest. A lot of people have told me like, hey, you need to get out of doing all of this yourself. But I'm the other thing I figured out about myself is I'm actually a pretty bad teacher. Like when I sit down with someone on my team and I try to show them how to do something, or if I'm trying to describe something to a client, how something's gonna go, I'm way better if I just do it and show it to them. But I know you'd be the first person to tell me also that, like, hey, like how do you scale that? How do you really go anywhere? I mean, in a way I'm making it harder on myself, but I'm also like simultaneously happier at the same time. Yeah, but back to your point about work-life balance, I'll just hit on that real quick. You're right. The other thing is I think some people want to work from 9 to 5, and then to them work-life balance is working from 9 to 5 and then being able to watch their favorite show at night or go to their kids' game and not work on the weekends. And like I have admiration for people that are really good at shutting down from particular time periods of the day or week, and like people that actually can take vacation and not think about work. And one thing I've realized about myself, it's taken me probably 10 or 11 years to actually get to the point where I feel good about myself in this regard, and now I know what to do, is I'm okay now with the fact that like I can never stop thinking about work, ever. And I've always been that way since I was 15. I just from 15 to 20, I was like a DJ. I could never stop thinking about DJing, even when I was hanging out with my friends. Then when I was interning with the Pistons and working for the Pistons, hanging out with my friends, that's all I could think about, working for the Pistons. Then I had my own website and was a marketing director at Columbia State at the same time. It's all I could think about. And now with other agencies that I've worked for and now data-driven design, I can't shut it off. So what I try to do is now it's like, I realize that that's my oxygen and that's what keeps me going. So to get my work-life balance, I just try to enjoy every moment that's happening in the day. So in other words, if I find myself starting to think about work at 6:30 when I'm having dinner with the family or playing with my son or daughter or whatever, I try to remind myself, just enjoy this moment with Max or Sam or Kate or whoever, because it's okay if you want to open up your laptop at 9:30 and crank on a couple hours of work, or if you want to people think I'm insane for getting up at 3 a.m. and working until 5 or whatever. It's just, that's when I'm happier. Like I have a better noon
Yeah.
if I do that from 3 to 5. And it's just, I would fight that for so many years of you can't start working until 9 or whatever. So learning all those things about myself, that's probably the most enjoyable thing out of the first almost 2 years out of my business, is just figuring all that stuff out about myself first. And then I think my hope is in years 2, 3, 4, and 5 of my business, I'll be ready to do different things. I'll be like, okay, this is, I've done this, I got there in terms of what I want to do. Now I'm ready to take a step back and maybe architect something where I can delegate more, and then I think that's when I'll be able to scale.
I kind of want to turn this into 2 episodes, because that was an awesome 10-minute discussion on just business and what it's like growing your own business. Now I feel like I have to start an entrepreneurship
Let's do it, man.
Podcast, a whole separate thing. So Chance the Entrepreneur, not quite, but he talks to entrepreneurs. I don't know.
We should do.
Needs a better name.
We might have just spun off a podcast between you and I.
That was a great little tangent, but we will bring it back a little bit towards web development. I think this is all super important though, because a lot of developers want to start their own business, whether or not it's starting their own business with other people on a team or just working for themselves as freelancers or contractors, which I talked about last week. There's a lot of different avenues, and this is great because this is one of them, and it's a really important thing to know about yourself and how you find that balance if you're going out to do that yourself. So I think that's really cool. Talk about hiring. So if I'm a web developer and I see your business and I see you have an opening, what is it as someone who's running a startup, that you might look for in an employee that, let's say, you might not look for or might not need if you were running a 100-person organization?
Yeah, great question. You need to make my life easier. And that's a completely intangible thing, but when you're in my position, you know what that looks like. So I know someone that's going to make my life easier or make my life harder. And the tricky part is, for that person, they might have the same talent level as each other. As a small business owner or an entrepreneur, of a startup, somebody running a startup that just has a super small team, we're talking like, 1 to 10 people, you really need people who are going to make your life easier as the business owner, because there's no way around it. You have to wear all of the hats. Unless you're going to create a lot of unnecessary overhead cost for yourself, which some people do. I think some people don't realize that maybe they're spending their money as an entrepreneur on making their life easier by hiring somebody to do the books, somebody to do, maybe some of the legal stuff that they have to do or whatever. But they're spending a lot of money on that. My take is, I'm going to spend money on people who may have the same skill set as a developer or as a digital strategist or digital marketer or content creator. But if one of them has a certain level of communication style or lack of proactivity or lack of follow-up, that the other one shows proactivity and excitement and energy and hustle, then for me personally, I'm going to go with that one is going to make my life easier, so I'm going to go with them. And what I've decided is that it's okay to actually hire people full-time and see whether or not they work out. So in year 1, I went from 1 person myself to 6, and then 2 of them they were not making my life easier, and they knew they weren't making my life easier. And we each individually had one-on-one conversations where actually they almost brought it up as much as I did, because we both knew. And so it was actually easy, amicable splits with both of those people. And I'm proud of that, because now they're in a better situation and I'm in a better situation. I have 2 less people than I did, but now started to hire 2 more people on a contract basis as a way of figuring out, okay, are they going to make my life easier? And as long as they do, I'm going to keep sending them work and then potentially try to bring them on full time. Does that make sense?
It makes total sense. And I was actually just on another podcast a couple days ago, and someone was asking me something similar, where they were talking about what newer developers can do to stand out, which we'll talk about as well. But for me, it's always less about what you know and more about what you do, and more about really communication. I always say, that's an oversimplification of it, because communication is a lot harder than it sounds by just saying communication. There's a lot more to it. There's personality styles. You have to work well with other people, and other people aren't all the same. But generally, just being communicative in general is such a strong thing, and the power of just answering your email every once in a while is just unbelievable. And it's unbelievable because it's so easy and simple, and so many people don't do it. And the fact that you could take someone who might be at skill level 7 out of 10, and then someone whose skill level is 4 out of 10, but that 4 out of 10 is just on top of it all the time, and you never have to ask where they are or where a project stands. You just know that you can count on that person. That goes so much further, in my opinion. And you can train them up to 7 out of 10, no problem. But it's so much harder to train that communication and that proactivity and that hustle. That's all super important.
Yeah, and you just nailed exactly what the details around my comment are exactly, which is, how do you make my life easier? You make my life easier by communicating with our client in an effective way. Like you said, answering your email or whatever project management tool you're using. There's no reason why you can't proactively go post the update to Basecamp and tag the client and me, and that is making my life easier, because now you've taken something off of my plate as the person who's responsible for all things client services at our company. So yeah, you nailed it. It's like, if you're listening to this and you're like, well, what is he talking about, make my life easier? It's exactly what you just said, which is be proactive about starting a project, be proactive about doing research around what the possibilities would be, around maybe mapping out whether it's like a data flow or just even like an outline from other apps that you might be thinking about, your client might be. If we're talking client services, being a developer who thinks through a solution and then communicates a bunch of different potential solutions to your team and to the client is going to set you apart. Even if, like you said, if you're a C+ developer versus an A- developer, the client and oftentimes your supervisor, they don't know that. And so rather than like beat your chest,
they don't care as much.
And they don't care. Yeah, you're right. They don't care at all, really, how well you code versus somebody else, or how clean your code is, or this methodology that you use versus some other methodology. And they don't care that you're up on the latest and greatest like new release of some kind of technology, as much as they care about the results of their project and the perceived results of their project on the communication side. So yeah, absolutely. And as we all know too, I mean, let's be honest, there are a million different ways to build things, and the clients want to spend the least amount of money possible and the least amount of time on their project. And so being transparent about using out-of-the-box technology can put you ahead as a developer as well. Meaning, if there's a framework, talk to the client and explain to the client, Bootstrap has all of these. We all know that it might not be the latest and greatest right now, but it has all these styles and it has all these things that don't have to be rebuilt. And so I think the client doesn't really know that. And so even as we all know in WordPress with different plugins and stuff, just being able to have those conversations with your client about all the different technology options and I mean, you can really make yourself more valuable to your organization. And if you're a developer who is aspiring to be like the lead of a department and oversee other developers, I can tell you that probably the number 1, 2, and 3 thing would be how you are able to communicate different solutions and technology options to your decision makers that would hire you for that position, or the client themselves.
Yeah, and I think this is really a very poignant difference between working for a startup and working for a larger organization, in that all of these things you talk about are totally true at a certain point, and then at a certain point that does start to change. And I could talk all day about like that transition, and there's a lot of discomfort in that transition from being a company that like builds everything on Bootstrap or on WordPress, and then scaling up to this level where, okay, we're actually building custom applications, and these micro, enhancements start to matter, and the technology starts to matter, and you're working on teams of other developers, and that cleanliness of code, that stuff starts to matter at a point. But this is why I think startups are so amazing for younger developers or for newer developers, because you don't necessarily have to have all that as long as you can solve the problem and you can get it done. You can get out the door for as little as possible, as quick as possible, just like you said. But then you should, in my view, you should always be looking to up your skills in that process, right? So today we're using WordPress plugins, we're using frameworks, we're using all of these tools that have all this stuff out of the box, and we're learning over time, okay, I used Bootstrap and I ran into this problem with it, and maybe this is why a team might not use Bootstrap. And maybe over time you start to recognize, okay, this is a skill I can develop and grow, and maybe I can go actually save my employer some money by developing this custom thing that we use that suits our specific needs. But that's not something you use, right out the door. You're trying to make a business here, right? So I think that's a really important skill to recognize early on in the startup phase, and then how to scale up from that, and then recognize when is the right time to start hiring other developers, and like looking at those other factors that people I think obsess about a little too much early on, but really start to matter as you start growing. I think that's just an important distinction.
Yeah, that exact mindset, to have that mindset is a skill, and I believe it's a skill that comes with experience, and I think that inexperience leads to wanting to kind of prove your worth and get to a particular status or a position. And I think that what you just described can come with trying as many things as possible on your own time to become the most knowledgeable that you can be, to identify when is the right time to go from using out of the box technologies to, hey, we can't do it this way anymore.
Absolutely.
And I think it takes all of us some amount of projects, however many years, it doesn't really matter. I think you have to work on a certain amount of projects and have a certain amount of experiences on those projects to understand, okay, this is when we know we're going to hit a dead end on this, and we're going to have a heck of a time trying to spaghetti something together later on if the client wants to do X, Y, or Z. Or, I mean, client can mean like your internal client too,
sure.
Right? So.
Yeah, and this was something that I did early on in my career as a developer. The first websites I ever built was my company's website, which was sort of a lot of pressure when you're thinking like they let me build this website and it's the first one I'm building like as an official developer. But yeah, and like I wanted so hard to go above and beyond and impress, but I knew at the end of the day that no one really cared unless the project got finished and it looked good at the end of the day. And there were some things that I wanted to do differently. So what I did was I built this thing the quickest I possibly could using the tools that I could that would help me do that. And then after it was done and it shipped and everything, I started rebuilding it in my spare time at home as just a self-development process, and rebuilding it without using all of these tools and just hard coding as much as I could and using vanilla everything, vanilla JavaScript, vanilla CSS, no frameworks kind of thing. And just to sort of build that skill and say, okay, this worked this way and it did the job, but we could actually maybe improve upon it. And that helped me grow as a developer a lot, but it didn't cost my company any money. And it was sort of on like self-education project, but it was super helpful for me to see how some of that stuff works under the hood. I think that's a really good exercise for a lot of people to go into as a developer.
I agree. I'm huge on that, and I don't know. I think that it's maybe a sensitive issue with some people. I don't know if it's not a sensitive issue. It's like I definitely think that there's a lot of disagreement when I say things like you just have to use your own time to get better at this stuff, and if you really want to advance, you have to use your own spare time to do it and not expect people to pay you for that. You need to learn either with some people learn better in groups or joining meetups and things like that, and that's great. Then there's obviously online communities that we can all become a part of, and then there's your example I really resonate with a lot in that like there's just been countless projects that I've just done late at night or early in the morning just to do it, just to be able to be like, hey, I know how to do this, here's how I did it, kind of a thing. And I think if you can put in that work, then you're going to be really successful. However you do it, the willingness to be able to essentially work for free, then that's going to pay off in the long run. I'm not saying give away your services to someone else for free, but I'm saying spend your own time becoming better at it like you did, and then it's going to pay off big time. And I think whether you're a developer or whether you're anyone, I think that should be your mindset.
Totally. I'm not going to push back, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to say I think this is another important distinction between the startup and the big established organization. I think that every business owner should aspire. I say this, I'm projecting. If I were going to run a business, and this is what I would aspire to, right? There are the things that I can do because I have X amount of dollars, and if I can barely afford to hire an employee, I'm not going to also be able to afford to have them sit through trainings and have all of these amazing benefits right out of the gate, right? The trade-off on the other end is that what you get out of that is some of that hustle mentality, but also the key to potential rapid advancement where you might not. So that is sort of a trade-off, and I think, you shouldn't necessarily expect I'm going to work for this guy who has 4 employees, 5 employees, 6 employees, and they're going to pay me over lunch to do all of these amazing things and just learn on company time. I don't think you're going to get that out of a startup, but I do think that businesses should aspire to at some point build something that can provide people with those kinds of opportunities over time. I think that's just part of the growth process.
Yeah, no, I think you hit on a very important point, because I think like employee retention is key, especially when you have good people. So it's hard to find good people, and you're right, the startup will do it differently than the large corporation, like you'll have your Ubers and your Googles and Facebooks that will have like campuses that they'll build to have their developers be basically incentivized to never leave the campus. And then you'll have companies like mine that have, 4 full-time employees that will literally just ask their employees what they want and then give that to them if they're good people, because that's the best that we can do. And if that's something like, I want to work from home, that could be valuable to someone, and that could cost the company no money. In fact, that could save the company money. So I think it's about, you're right, like depending on the size of the company, it's going to have to be, your employee retention strategy is going to have to be very different. And when you're out trying to actively recruit like the top developers in the world to come build some of the most advanced software apps in the world, like some of the larger companies, then I think you have to be on the offense with the perks. And some of that would be training, right, to your point. So I think that like the employee retention strategy, one thing I've learned I've been fortunate enough to work with some amazing people who are super talented developers. That's like I think it's a blessing of my career for like the last 10 years, being able to work with developers. And one thing I've noticed is like they're all hungry to learn, regardless of who they are. The number one thing, and this is what I love about developers, is everyone's hungry to learn. They just kind of do it and communicate it in a different way, and they want to do it, and it feels like everybody kind of wants to do it on their own time, which is fair. They want to do it when they're ready for it. And so I think you're right on that continuing education piece. It has to be there, but for a company like mine, it has to be there. Like, what do you want? What do you want to do? When do you want to do it? For example, one of my full-time developers, he wanted to go to a particular front-end development conference in Florida that happens to be next week. I mean, it's a no-brainer for me. And it just came through, what do you want to do this year? Like, how do you want this year to be awesome for you? And that was one of the things he said, and it was like, that's easy.
Done.
Absolutely,
yeah.
Done.
That's awesome. I love that too. And that scrappiness and that ability to be very flexible without having to think like, well, I'm giving Sally this and I have to go give Sam this, and like this person wanted that. Like no, I'm running a shop with 4 people and everyone is different, and I have the ability, because I run my own freaking business, to do what it is that I can do for them to make them happy and to put out extra great work for me. I think that's a really, really great thing that you have as sort of an advantage over some of the larger shops. Running a business in the web space, what trends in technology do you sort of have your eye on in the coming years that will impact your growth? And what do you think other developers should be doing to prepare for the next 5 years with a lot of seismic shifting and going on in technology?
I'm going to go to a conference called VoiceCon, and it's going to talk about the leaders in Alexa skill development and Apple HomePod and Google Home, and how those voice devices are becoming relevant to consumers and potentially to businesses in terms of a communication tool. So I'm starting to see people interacting with voice devices and listening to podcasts. And so this VoiceCon event, I'm hoping to learn if there's an opportunity, which I think there is, to build voice skills, essentially. And from having done a little bit of research on it, you can go to Amazon and become an Amazon developer, and you can take tutorials on building Alexa skills. And there's actually something called an Alexa flash briefing, which happens to seem to be far easier than building an actual Alexa skill. But my understanding so far is that the Alexa skill development for a developer really of anyone's caliber who would work in any of the organizations that we've worked for actually seem completely doable out of the gate. And it's just a matter of, are you ready for something new? Are you passionate about trying something new? So for me, I think there's a huge opportunity there. I think that within the next 5 years, if we can be a client services business that can figure out how to build Alexa skills, for example, that would benefit our B2B clients, and show them those skills and demo those skills for them, that they will buy them from us. I think actually any agency or any developer who wants to do that right now, it's like the wild, wild west. I mean, there's unlimited potential for like a land grab in that space if you wanted to try that. So I'm super interested in spending a lot of my spare time teaching myself how to build Alexa skills and just seeing where that goes. And so I'm going to go to this conference in May. It's going to be more of a business side of it to analyze what the opportunity is to potentially monetize that. I want to see where that goes, but we'll see.
That's pretty cool.
What do you think about
I never
that?
thought about it. Yeah, I'm so focused on the things that I'm learning in this moment that it's hard to sort of step out of that to look at the bigger picture. But I know I've heard a lot of talk about Alexa skills specifically, but just generally speaking, more voice space type of programming. Machine learning, obviously, I think is going to be huge, and I've seen so many really awesome examples of people turning this abstract concept of machine learning into very practical things. Like a really cool tool that I found the other day was a WordPress plugin that's in development that will analyze your photos and automatically generate alt text for your photos, which if you're a really big advocate for accessibility, which I am, I think that's huge, because people have thought about alt text as this like abstract Google strategy, when in reality the most important thing about alt text is so that people who have trouble with your website can better interact with it, right? And for people who use screen readers can interact better with your website, and making those alt text tags as descriptive as possible is really, it's something that no one does.
You mean stuffing them with keywords?
Right, absolutely, which is a huge pet peeve of mine, but
Right.
is super common. But making them actually helpful to people, which is their core purpose, and you have a tool that can now do this automatically and lower the barrier of entry for things. And I'm all about lowering the barrier of entry and reducing friction in anything. So if you can take a step that someone has to do out of the process and just make it happen for them, like that's huge. And so like that small little thing is going to make people's lives better, and I love that. That's a big one for me. Something that I'm looking to get into a little bit is machine learning. And there's the blockchain, which obviously everyone's talking about for cryptocurrency, but it has all these other amazing applications that I don't think we've even started to tap into the potential there. All kinds of stuff is happening, and that's what's so exciting about the field.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the biggest thing for me too is like just figuring out what, I'm pretty much a salesman. Like I figure out what is someone gonna buy, and it's not a salesman in the negative sense of the word, but it's a salesman in the sense of there's got to be something over there that's going to make someone else's life easier, or provide value to them, or help them grow their business. And so if I can help build technology that's going to help them do that, and they're going to pay me for it, then that's the salesman transactional mentality. And so that's my perspective on it. But it's interesting talking to other people, like yourself included, where you're passionate about being able to have someone have a better experience on the web, regardless of who that person is. Like there's someone having a better experience on the web through your passion for the accessibility. And so, I mean, like kudos to you for that. And it's just interesting to think through, for people to all work together at any size organization. I think you're always going to have someone who's passionate about one thing and then someone who's passionate about another thing. And so I would say for us all to come each other's way is going to be a good thing for anyone listening to advance their own career. Because like if you're looking to advance your career, then just like slightly putting yourself, if you can take your ability to build these types of technologies and slightly put yourself in the other person's shoes and be like, if I could build that, but then show them how it has this value for them, and then maybe you can even build it better also.
Absolutely. And just to hone in on that, I think it's really important to know what different people's motivations are. And there's nothing wrong with being a salesperson and thinking, how can I make this sale? Because what you said is exactly true. How can I make this sale is ultimately how can I help solve this person's problem? And the mindset that I have about it might be a little different because it doesn't necessarily come from the sales side, but it does have that, it shares that common goal of solving a problem for someone and improving someone's experience. And if you are the person that looks for these, we'll call them high and noble things that technology can do for whatever reason, if you can find a way to position them, which I think is not that hard, if you can position it in a way to where it does also help someone who's trying to sell a product, I think it's a no-brainer. And for a person to come away with that and say, like, you can simultaneously improve the experience for this audience over here and also improve your sales, like that's an easy decision.
Yeah, absolutely. You said something earlier that I wanted to just make a comment on, and it was around a developer, and kind of it made me think of like different stages in a developer's career. So you might have early on a different mindset than you would have later. And something you said was around, do they want to advance in a small company? Do they want to advance in a large company? Or do they want maybe a gateway to that, or a potential career is to actually be a contractor? And so what I've seen recently is developers who have gone heads down for a particular either client services company building stuff for working for an agency that builds stuff for clients. So they're being passed from project to project to project, and they're honing their skills, but I've seen them not necessarily be fulfilled. Some people are fulfilled, some people aren't fulfilled. Then you have that same developer, to try and find fulfillment, goes over and works as like a product sort of owner in a product ownership role, where they're overseeing other developers and they're all building that company's product for that brand. And so I've seen developers go from project to project to project, being unfulfilled, then going over to one project and being super fulfilled for a longer period of time, but then kind of hitting a wall. And like, how do you advance? Because you've already got the CEO, the COO, the CIO, and now maybe you've got the super talented developer, and the developer starts to hit kind of a glass ceiling. And so if that same developer starts to think about some of these concepts that we were just talking about, how do you now provide value to the point where you could actually sell something as a salesperson because you're solving the problem for someone? That's where I think explore the contractor role, because now all of a sudden you can become your own business and you can pick and choose your project and set your rates. And I think that I would like to see more developers, when they start to get frustrated or hit that ceiling, I would like to see them take the risk of becoming their own company, because they can also have a work-life balance. They can get their work-life balance. They can be remote if they want to be. If they choose to be in the office with people because they like that, they can be. If they choose to be remote, they can be. And they can also set their own hourly rate and their earning potential. That's how they can get through the glass ceiling with their earning potential. So, sorry, it took me a long time to verbalize that, but it was just kind of a point that I think like I want a lot of people to maybe consider as they're thinking about their career. Don't rule that out, because I think it's a viable option for developers.
It's a trade-off, and the ultimate thing that you get in the end of that is freedom. And I think so many people value that, love other things, and it's all a matter of how you want to structure your life and what you look for in whatever it is you're doing day to day. You know, I'm one of those people that definitely values freedom over a lot of other tangible things. So there's a monetary trade-off. Like a really good example for me is I don't do traffic. My office now is exactly 8 minutes from my house, and if there's construction, it's 9 minutes, and that always irritates me. So I just don't want to do traffic. I don't mind working in an office, but I don't want to do traffic, and I don't know that I'll ever take a job more than 10 minutes from a 10-minute drive from my house, unless I'm walkable, in which case I'll take a 10-minute walk. But knowing like that's worth at least like $20,000 a year for me. Like I will gladly take less salary or some other tangible thing if I don't have to drive an hour. I know people that do that drive, and I just don't understand it, because as soon as I was doing less than 20 minutes, it's like a life-changing event.
Yeah.
It really is. So that flexibility, that freedom is really big.
And I know you're trying to wrap up, but I just want to say your Instagram story really resonated with me, because you talked about burnout, and you said sometimes you need to step away when you're trying to solve a problem. And I think that that's a real thing that I just want to reiterate. Like, that was a great point by you, because this, whether it's fighting traffic every day or whether it's sitting in front of the same problem trying to solve it for hours and hours and you're not getting anywhere, you do need to step away, and then when you come back, it does help you. Even if you go try to work on something completely different, you might have a breakthrough and then come back to the other thing and be able to solve the problem. And I think that micro example that you gave also applies to what you're talking about with your traffic example, because you need to figure out those things that are frustrating you in the macro, and then as a developer, don't be the guy or girl that becomes the grumpy developer because you are more talented. Like, let's face it, like, you are more talented than the people that you're, like, they all need you. They're all coming to you. The nature of the whole being a developer thing is that everyone's coming to you. When can you have this done? How can we do this? The salesperson, the project manager, and the QA person, and whoever else, like, they're all coming to you, and the client, and they're all coming to you for all the answers. So rather than be the grumpy developer who lets all of that wear on you, and then you get that kind of macro burnout, be the type of developer that says, I don't want to fight traffic every day, or I want to work from home every day. I don't care about this, but I care about that. And then you can make your career decision based around that and avoid the overall burnout.
It's just like starting your own business and asking those questions early on about, I know I don't like meetings, so I'm going to structure my business in a way that takes me out of meetings. And whether you own your own business or not, you can make those life decisions. And you can be, that's a great thing about being a developer is we're pretty in demand these days, and we have the luxury of being somewhat choosy what kind of work we do, and there are so many options out there. So don't think that you have to take the first thing that comes along just because it pays the bills, but it's an hour drive or it hits A, B, or C pain point of yours, and be happy. Don't suffer the burnout. Step away. Think about what's important in life. It's not always money, it's not always career, but the career contributes to those stressors, and try to remove some of that if you absolutely can.
Consider, if you're in that phase and you're trying to find a job and you're trying to pick the right one, because I think you make a good point, but consider, find a crappy application or a crappy website and build a better version of it, and then go sell it to that company while you're in that transition phase, or in your spare time if you hate your current job. And you can, I talk, you and I both kind of said in our own way earlier, like, you need to spend your own time doing X, Y, and Z to get really good at it. One way to actually monetize that would be to just go build something while you're trying to find your next job. You might find that could be pretty fulfilling. I mean, that's real. Like, go build something, be like, hey, this is a better version of what you have right now. Can I talk to you about selling this to you, and just maybe see what happens.
I love that idea. I would throw a little twist on there and say, build it using a tool that you're not comfortable using. And then you will simultaneously learn a new skill. And even if it's not better than what the company already had, you can take it and say, hey, I brought this to the table. I recognize you were using, A, B, and C technology in the stack, and maybe you don't have this other skill over here that, I just so happen I'm learning in my spare time, and I can bring this to the table, and maybe over time start teaching this to your other developers, and now we have this in the skill set, and that adds tremendous value. I think that comes down to being able to add value to anyone. That's the most important thing to everyone. So I love that. I love that.
Brilliant. Great
awesome
call.
Dude, this was awesome. This was really great. I appreciate you coming on today.
Thanks, Chance.